Welcome to another episode of the Accidental Landlord Podcast. I am your host, Peter McKenzie, and today we're going to be talking about 5 myths about landlords that most people aren't really aware of. So let's get right into it. There's a lot of drama around landlords and tenants and rent control and things like that going on in the world right now. And we thought we would make an episode that kind of hits on the biggest misconceptions or myths about landlords. And we're going to do the same thing about tenants. Not in this particular episode, but in the interest of being fair and showing all sides of the coin, that's what we plan on doing. So let's get right into it. First myth that we are going to dispel is that most landlords are big, greedy corporations. And in the public right now, there is a lot of controversy surrounding these corporate landlords, these big venture capital-backed companies that are buying up all these homes and properties and squeezing out the first-time home buyer that's trying to buy a house. Is that true? Is that accurate? How many of these corporate landlords do we have in California? So let me just quantify this. We're talking about single-family properties. So we're not talking about large apartment complexes, because most large apartment complexes are owned by some sort of entity, whether it's an LLC or a syndicate of investors or corporations, things along those lines. We're talking about single-family homes in a regular neighborhood that are owned by these corporations. There's been multiple studies that have been done, and the statistics that's most telling is less than 2% of single-family homes are owned by investors with 10 or more properties. So in all the single-family homes in the state of California, people that own 10 or more, that's less than 2%. So by and large, the majority of them are owned by individuals or small mom and pop style investors. Only 2% are owned by people that own 10 or more. So obviously, those people that own the large portfolios, one that comes to mind is Invitation Homes, which owns thousands of properties. They're clearly one of those corporate landlords that own single-family homes. But by and large, most of them are not. They're mom and pop investors or someone that moved out of the house, like they were living in it as their primary residence, and then they moved away or moved up or moved down, downsized into another house and just kept the previous house. That's the majority of the landlords. A misconception about these big corporate landlords is that they have no interest in building a relationship with their tenants and they only prioritize profit. I would say that that's probably more true for the corporate landlords than it is for the mom and pop. But for the most part, mom and pop landlords, they are interested in building relationships with their tenants. They are interested in doing the right thing. When you have a smaller landlord, they're usually more responsive to tenant needs and creating a positive living environment. That's what we see. That's the reality in single-family rental properties across the state. For the most part, they are invested in the success of that particular property or two properties, these small mom-and-pop landlords. Their financial future is absolutely tied to the performance of those properties. If those properties don't perform, they more than likely are going to lose money each and every month. I do want to touch on something about Invitation Homes. So I believe it was last year, I could be wrong on the dates. They did pay a $3.7 million fine for raising rents in excess of what the law allowed. So I am not here to make excuses for corporate giant landlords. They are out there, and sometimes they are impersonal, and sometimes they get in trouble. So Invitation Homes clearly was fined for some issues related to raising the rent. No excuses there. I'm not here to say that all landlords are the best thing in the world. I'm just here to say that most landlords are trying to do the right thing, and most landlords are not a big greedy corporation. All right, myth number 2. Landlords are all wealthy investors that are financially free. That is just not accurate. So the truth is, returns on rental properties, especially in our state, have been diminishing for the last couple of years. It's harder to make passive income on a rental property if you're purchasing the rental properties in, the last handful of years. And the reason is our prices are so expensive. And lately, the interest rates are so high. It's very difficult for a landlord to buy a rental property, put a renter in that pays market rate rents, and create a positive cash flow return for themselves. It's nearly impossible unless they're coming in with a monster down payment or they're paying all cash for the home, which is also difficult to do. Some people think if you're a landlord, it's a guaranteed path to riches with minimal effort, and you're just going to be, getting rich off the backs of poor tenants. And that is not the case. Being a landlord is a tough, tough business. You have multiple laws that are not designed to be in your best interest. You have tenants who sometimes damage properties. You have cities who are constantly regulating landlords. You have financial markets that sometimes go in your favor, sometimes don't. Currently, in today's market, they're not. The financing is very expensive. Interest rates are around 7% plus. Sometimes, and then usually an investor pays a higher interest rate than what a homeowner would pay. So long and short, being a landlord, getting into business as a landlord, it's a relatively risky investment. There's unexpected expenses, there's vacancies, there's all these things that can kind of bite you that will impede your ability to create wealth and passive income for you and your kids and their kids. So most landlords are average people like you and me who are trying to use it as a strategy in their overall financial picture. They're not getting filthy rich off of one rental property and riding off into the sunset. It's just not the case. It doesn't mean that 30 years ago, someone bought multiple homes and is today experiencing a nice, healthy return, because that is accurate. That does happen. But by and large, most mom and pop landlords, they are not getting super rich off one rental property or two rental properties like most people think they are. Okay, myth number 3. Landlords are money-hungry leeches and they're just trying to suck every last penny out of their tenants. That's generally speaking not true. Now, there are stereotypes of landlords that are, excessively raising the rent and nickel and diming tenants and charging them for every little scratch in the house. That is a stereotype. The reality is, if you're a landlord in California, the law is very clear about how you run your business. In fact, it's a very regulated business. You have the Department of Real Estate, you have the state of California, you have rent control, you have little local city ordinances and county ordinances. It's a very regulated industry. Landlords are not allowed to charge whatever they want, whenever they want. The law is very clear about what you can deduct out of a security deposit, how much you can charge for rent in certain situations. If you're interested in the more details about rent control, go look at our podcast on Senate Bill 567, which was a couple episodes ago that goes into detail there. But the law gets involved in what you can and cannot charge tenants. So although the price of housing is expensive and rents have been going up the last several years, it's not because landlords have all conspired and they're getting together trying to figure out ways to raise more rent so they can collect more money from their tenants and they can put their tenants in the poorhouse. That's just not the case. The truth is there's a shortage of affordable housing. There's a supply issue, which is increasing demand, which is increasing the price of rent. It's increasing the price of the house to purchase. Since it's so hard to purchase a house right now because the interest rates are so high, it's dumping more people into the renter's pool. So there's more tenants looking for houses, which increases demand, which is just a vicious cycle that goes on and on and on. And rents keep going up year over year. That's the reality. It's not because landlords decided, let's raise rent indefinitely until no one can afford it and we'll all be rich and ride off into the sunset. That's just not reality and not what's happening. The reality is a lot of times as a landlord, you are making a sacrifice. And that sacrifice is, we are probably going to lose money on this rental property in the beginning. And I know from experience, because we have hundreds and hundreds of clients at our property management company, that most of our clients don't make money in the beginning if they bought the house in the last few years. They're literally hanging on. Sometimes they're negative cash flow. They're watching every penny that they have so they can have the funds necessary to repair things, because a landlord has an obligation to fix the property when it needs to be fixed. For example, there's habitability laws that say you have to do these specific repairs if you want to rent your house out. And if you don't do those, then that is something that your tenants can sue you for. So landlords have to make sure they have money in reserve so they can replace the heater or the air conditioner or the stove if it goes out, because they are required by law to provide these things for the rental property. That takes money, and that takes planning, and that takes them budgeting and having those funds available. if you're a tenant and you're living in a property and all of a sudden the heater goes out and it's cold outside, the landlord goes, I'm sorry, I don't have money to fix that. You're just SOL. That's against the law. In fact, there's provisions in the law for tenants to go about fixing the property on their own and charging the landlord for the rent. There's things in the law that say you can't do that. So responsible landlords have to prepare for that. And what that usually means is they have to make some sacrifices. Maybe they don't get to spend that money on things that they maybe would like to spend the money on because they have to fund their reserve accounts so that they're in a position to make those repairs. That's just the perspective of a landlord. I think it's worth talking about. It dispels the myth that there's just unlimited funds and landlords are, rich, fat cats living on the top of the hill somewhere just laughing at tenants. It's just not the case. Okay. Myth number 4, and this is a bigger one, so we're going to take a little bit more time on this. The myth is that landlords or investors are the reason that the housing prices are so high and that the supply is so limited because they're buying up all the houses to rent out. That is the myth that's out there. It's easy to point your finger at investors or landlords and say, it's your fault. This is your doing. Well, the reality is that's not the case. It would be nice if if investors had that kind of ability to move major housing markets, but the reality is they just don't. In fact, this has been studied all over the world. I just read a study from the Netherlands where they actually made it illegal in a certain area for investors to purchase houses to rent out because they thought this was going to fix the housing problem that they have in their country. And I read through the study and the result of it was this. It did, in the areas that they precluded investors from buying properties, it did slightly increase the number of owner-occupied homes. Of course, that makes total sense. If an investor can't buy in a neighborhood, the people that are buying are going to live there. We're going to have more people that are owner-occupied than not. What it didn't do is it did nothing to the price of housing. The price of housing stayed the same or went up, just like everything else. What was interesting, though, is the price of rent, they noticed, went up more than areas that they didn't do this. They didn't get into why, and I think that's up for people to interpret, but more than likely it's because there was a shortage of rentals in the area. So when a rental, and I don't think they kicked people out of rental homes and made them sell them to owner-occupied homes. So when a rental did become available in those areas, guess what? There was more demand for it because there weren't a lot of rentals because the law says you can't have a rental there anymore. So as a result, that constrained demand shot the prices up, which is against what everybody wants. So the other point that's worth making here is we can't have everyone be a homeowner. There is a place in our society, in our market for renting properties. In fact, a large percentage of our renters choose intentionally to rent even though they're in a position to purchase. It's a lifestyle choice. Some people are better suited to renting. They want the flexibility of being able to leave and move somewhere else whenever they want. They love the flexibility of not having to be responsible for expensive repairs. When you're a homeowner, you're on the hook for thousands of dollars of repairs. If your heater goes out, there's $5-10 Or if your roof needs to be replaced, there's $20-30 Different costs in different areas of the market. We totally understand that. It's just for illustration purposes. But there are people who choose to rent. So if we're going to turn around and blame investors that they're the reason for all these woes, it's just not accurate. Does that affect some of the supply and demand? Possibly. I could see that argument, but is it the reason? No. There's no one reason. If we had to point our finger at anybody, I would say let's point our finger at the state of California in general on how difficult they make it to build housing. There's so many surcharges and so many mellorues and taxes and development fees and school district fees to build a house that they have no choice but to sell it at a high price because that's how much it costs to build it. And this has been proven over and over again. To build a house in the plains of Oklahoma, let's just say for the sake of our argument, is $150,000. To build the same house in Southern California could be $500,000 simply because of how difficult and how many roadblocks the state of California and the cities and counties inside the state of California have put on the house. In my mind, that's the reason why housing is so expensive. Now, there are large conglomerates like Invitation Homes. I'm just picking on them because they were in the news recently with that fine. But there are others who do have a larger concentration of properties in certain neighborhoods, and that potentially does give them the ability to raise rents and drive up price themselves. That also is illegal because you can't fix prices, but that's a different topic. By and large, the mom and pop landlords aren't able to influence the housing market at large. They're just not able to. They don't own enough properties. They don't have enough economies of scale. They're usually just people, they're really no different than the people renting their properties. They just happen to own the property. And a lot of them, everyone, for the most part, most people start off as renters and eventually buy their first home. And then if they move out of there, and now they're a landlord. It's definitely not this class of people that is very elite that, only certain people can become. There's plenty of people who scrape, and save their pennies to become landlords. That's how, honestly, most new investors do it. They're willing to sacrifice personally so they can get into a property and start their journey as a landlord. Here's the other big point on why this myth is not really accurate. Landlord or investors typically are not looking for the same house that a first-time home buyer is looking for. For the most part, first-time home buyers are looking for a nice house that's fixed up, that they can move into, that doesn't require hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs, that's ready to go, turnkey. Investors are the opposite. They're looking for that diamond in the rough, that fixer-upper, that one that is so ugly, the first-time home buyers just don't even go look at it because they know it's a lot of work. They know it's going to take a lot of money. Investors target those types of houses because they know that's where the opportunity is. If they're willing to fix these big problems with the house, then there may be a return for them to make at the end after they've done all those things. Most average homeowners are not interested in foundation repairs and replacing all the windows and new flooring and a new roof and, big structural issues. They're not interested in that. But investors, for the most part, are. And that's how they make their money. There was a study done. There's a home builder association in the state of California, and they did a study. 99% of their inventory that home builders in the state of California build are sold to individuals. I thought that was an interesting statistic, that we don't have big, corporate landlords buying up all the new houses. 99% of them going to individuals. All right, last myth we're going to talk about. Landlords and renters are natural enemies. This one actually really gets at me because I hate this stereotype, and it's alive and well in our housing market. I can tell you that for sure. Just go into the comments of our podcast and you will see there's a lot of vitriol and hate from landlords to tenants and tenants to landlords. It's so counterproductive. It's so bad for everyone that's involved. It's just terrible. So people believe that all these legal regulations or legal battles and these regulations that the states are passing, create a conflict between landlords and renters. They definitely aren't good for the relationship between landlords and renters, depending on which side of the spectrum you view these things from. They do create constraints that cause tension between the parties, but in reality, renters and landlords, they want the same thing. They want a stable housing market. They want, if you're a tenant, you want a nice place you can live, that you don't feel like you're being taken advantage of, that you can afford. And the landlords, they want a nice tenant who's going to pay the rent and take care of the place. The interests line up on most of the issues. I'm here to tell you, personally, I don't really like the government controlling aspects of being a landlord. But it's a reality we live in, especially in the state of California. The government is involved. This is a more regulated state than other states in the union. Anything in the South or the Midwest, generally speaking, has less regulation than the state of California or the states along the coast on both sides of the East and West Coast. It doesn't mean that it's impossible to be a landlord here. What it does mean is that it is a more complex business to do here. But that's just the downside. The upside is, generally speaking, we have really great appreciation. We have high rents. That, in my mind, offsets some of the downsides of being overregulated. The other way to look at the overregulation we have is it scares a lot of landlords and investors away, which means there's opportunity for the people that are willing to work within the framework of the laws that we have here. And that's where I think the real opportunities for investors are. it's not like Columbus, Ohio, where you buy a house for $150,000 and you rent it out for $1,500 and you cash flow from day one. It requires different strategies in our markets, but there's still strategies that work. There's still ways to invest in real estate, and there's also ways to do it responsibly and ethically, where you don't become the target of your tenants, where the tenant and the landlord work together. In fact, we manage roughly 400 rental properties, and by far the majority of our renters and our landlords work well together, and we're obviously the go-between between the parties, but it's a symbiotic relationship that works. Where it doesn't work is if you have either party, landlord or the tenant, who is interested in being contentious and vindictive, and there are people on both sides of the coin, renters and landlords, that do behave that way, and that is bad for everyone as well. And I'm not here to defend bad tenants and bad landlords. They're there. In fact, we're going to highlight some bad landlords in our next episode to give you an idea of what you don't want to do as a landlord, because when you do some of these things, it's like shooting yourself in the foot. You can, maybe it makes you feel better to be mean or mistreat somebody for a temporary period of time, but it is going to bite you and it's going to hurt you in the long run. And we're going to demonstrate that in that podcast when we talk about some of those landlord horror stories. Responsible landlords can attract and retain good tenants that stay a long time, and everyone's happy in the equation. That's the majority of rental properties in the state of California. There are the outliers, and we as responsible housing providers need to actively work to make it harder for those irresponsible providers to operate. And in those respects, some of the laws are a good thing. Okay, so that's the 5 myths. Landlords are big cold corporations. Number 1. Number 2, landlords are all wealthy investors. Number 3, landlords are money-hungry leeches. Number 4, landlords are the reason it's impossible to buy a house. And number 5, landlords and renters are natural enemies. We obviously have pretty strong opinions on these issues. Whether you agree or not, would love to have the conversation. Feel free to comment on the podcast. We would love to see what you guys are thinking. In conclusion, though, it's really important that there's clear communication between tenants and landlords, and that everyone is acting in a responsible manner and holding up their end of the bargain, whether it's a landlord who has a responsibility to provide a habitable house and to follow the terms of the lease, or whether it's a tenant who has a responsibility to pay the rent and take care of the property. As long as everybody does the right thing, this relationship works well. It's when people don't do the wrong thing that things start to go south. At Rincon, we are opposed to the landlord and renter being an enemy stereotype. We are absolutely opposed to it. We don't tolerate it. We believe in treating all of the parties that we work with, whether you're a landlord or a tenant or the people who work on the rental properties, fairly and well, with respect. That's how we run our business. That's why our tenants appreciate us. That's why our landlords appreciate us. It's really important that people just do the right thing and treat people well. And it goes a long way, because where you lay your head down at night is a very personal thing. Whether you're a homeowner or a renter, the feelings are the same. It's where you live, and it doesn't get more personal than that, which is why there is a responsibility on all the parties to act professionally and to do the right thing. Sorry if I repeated myself on some of this stuff. We're pretty passionate about some of these principles, especially where it comes to treating tenants well, because it's in the best interest of the landlord if we treat the tenants well. And it's in the best interest of the it's in the best interest of the tenant if the landlord treats the tenant well. So hope that makes sense. If you like our content, please share it, please like it, please comment, subscribe to our channel. Appreciate your time. Sorry for, sometimes I'm not the most organized presenter of my thoughts, as some of the comments have shown me, which I think is spot on. So I wish I was. But anyhow, thank you guys for your time. Appreciate you taking the moment to listen, and best of luck.